Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents The Wanderer, An Alaska Wolf's Final Journey by Tom Walker, narrated by Tom Beyer. For the strength of the wolf is the pack, and the strength of the pack is the wolf. Rudyard Kipling. Prologue. Where Rivers Meet. Yukon-Charley Rivers National Preserve. On the northern frontier of Canada and Alaska sprawls a wilderness largely devoid of human imprint. Here, the great Yukon River gouges through the bluffs and mountains of an ancient landscape to unmask Precambrian rocks whose stories reach back eons to the origins of life on Earth. Palisades of cliffs, chiseled out by the erosive power of surging water, constrict and bend the Yukon into wide oxbows. Crystalline tributaries, the Charley, Kandik, Nation, and others, tumble from the surrounding highlands and pass through a mosaic of forest, tundra, and muskeg to join the silt-laden Yukon. Gold Rush-era mining, trapping, and native camps and cabins crumble into the soil of dark woods, even as willow and alder growth reclaim human trails of bygone days. The mountain ramparts that scribe the horizons are rolling and gentle, unscathed by the glaciation that hewed other younger but taller subarctic ranges. Just east of the Kandik River, the south-facing slope of Ketul Mountain supports Arctic steppe plants characteristic of the treeless vegetation present across the north during the last ice age. The ancient, dry, cold steppe was rich with grasses, sedges, and sages that supported a mix of large mammals, including woolly mammoths, rhinos, bison, lions, muskox, bears, and wolves. Descendants of some of those animals still thrive here today. This is a land of extremes. In summer, the temperature soars, with frequent thunderstorms that trigger lightning-sparked wildfires, some of immense size. One fire burned 1.7 million acres, part of a record-breaking Alaska fire season in 2004 that consumed 6.6 million acres, nearly 10,500 square miles. Only the onset of winter truly doused the flames. Winter comes early, sometimes in October, and brings darkness, snow, and killing temperatures. The record low in Eagle City on the Yukon is negative 71 degrees Fahrenheit. The record high, 91 degrees Fahrenheit. 12 inches of precipitation fall annually, producing about 60 inches of snow. On the winter solstice, there are fewer than 4 hours of daylight. On the summer solstice, daylight at 22 hours is almost perpetual. The patchwork of forest and tundra, mountain and river supports a convocation of northern wildlife in a setting little changed from a time when only small families of indigenous people survived here. Each fall, when the hills and margins of the rivers turn gold, and the cries of migrating waterfowl fill the sky, today's Hunkwichin, children of the first people, hunt for moose and caribou to fill their winter larders in the place now called Yukon-Charley. In 1980, the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act, ANILCA, set aside 157 million acres in Alaska as federally protected national parks, national wildlife refuges, national monuments, national forests, wild and scenic rivers, and recreation and conservation areas. New national parks, including Gates of the Arctic, Kobuk Valley, Lake Clark, and others, comprised 43,585,000 acres, more than doubling the country's national park system. Anilka was hailed as a triumph by national conservation advocates, but widely vilified in Alaska as federal oppression and the largest illegal land grab in history. President Jimmy Carter was hanged or burned in effigy in several protesting communities, including Eagle at the edge of one of the new units, Yukon-Charley Rivers National Preserve. The Yukon-Charley Rivers Unit was one of 10 national preserves created, some of them contiguous to existing parks. The law called for these new units to be managed much like national parks, except that traditional uses, hunting, fishing, and trapping, would be permitted in recognition of a long history of land use. Yukon-Charley straddles the highlands between the Tanana and Yukon rivers on Alaska's border with Canada. The Tanana Hills, taller than the Adirondacks, make up the preserve's rugged spine. Included within the preserve's 2.5 million acres are 115 miles of the Yukon River and the entire Charley River drainage. The area was designed to protect the rivers, its fish and wildlife populations and habitat, and the cultural heritage and subsistence traditions of local people. The 1,980-mile-long Yukon River is the third longest river in North America, behind only the Missouri and Mississippi. From its source in British Columbia, the river flows through Yukon Territory in northwestern Canada and westward through Alaska to the Bering Sea, draining nearly 321,500 square miles, an area 25% larger than Texas. The name Yukon derives from a Gwich'in Athabascan word meaning white water river, a reference to the pale color of glacial runoff. During the brief summer season, silt from glaciers turns the river an opaque brown, but in winter the water runs clear beneath ice up to 6 feet thick. The 106-mile-long Charley River, a tributary of the Yukon, is one of many streams that tumble from the Tanana Hills, plunging more than 3,000 feet before broadening near its confluence with the Yukon. It is the only designated national wild and scenic river along the Yukon, with its entire watershed, over 1 million acres, protected. Some people see it as the most spectacular wild river in Alaska, unsullied and feral. Yukon-Charley, just 50 miles south of the Arctic Circle, sustains a wide panoply of wildlife adapted to the northern extremes: grizzly bears, Dall sheep, moose, caribou, marten, beavers, otters, foxes, lynx, wolves, and wolverines. Snowshoe hares, also called varying hares for their seasonal color change, cycle from near absence to remarkable profusion, influencing the survival and abundance of lynx, great horned owls, and goshawks, even wolves. Carved river bluffs shelter the highest density of nesting peregrine falcons in North America. In spring, songbirds and shorebirds migrate here from their tropical winter homes to nest and rear their young. Only around a dozen species remain year-round, notably ptarmigan, grouse, owls, jays, and ravens. Each summer, salmon migrate up the Yukon for as much as 1,840 miles to their spawning grounds in the river's headwaters, the longest salmon migration in the world. Perhaps the most notable, and certainly the most controversial, wildlife species in Yukon-Charley is the gray wolf, Canis lupus, a somewhat misleading name, as individuals vary in color from black to nearly white, with intermediate shades of gray and tan. In winter, a wolf's coat is dense and comprised of two different types of fur, a soft, thick underlayer and a coarse outer layer of long guard hairs, with the longest hairs on the back and across the shoulders. Their tails are long and brushy. Wolves have more fur in their ears than dogs to help protect the inner ear from the elements. And like dogs, wolves shed in the spring. These long-legged, deep-chested wolves are built to run. They have a long, loose stride, flexible wrists, and huge feet, their front feet larger and longer than their hind feet. Wolf tracks are unmistakable, and their width varies depending on the speed of travel. At a gallop or on soft ground, the paw spreads as much as 6 inches wide and as many long. Excellent hearing, vision, and acute sense of smell, said to be 100 times stronger than that of a human, combined with inherent intelligence, make them supreme predators. But wolves do not necessarily possess an inborn tendency to kill, according to veteran wolf researcher L. David Meach, whose seminal work was in the Northern Tier states and Canada. Rather, Meach suggests, they are born with certain behavior patterns that allow them to learn to kill. Steps in the learning process include the imitation of the killing behavior of adults and the association of killing with eating. The rate at which wolves kill large mammals varies with the availability of prey, by season, and with environmental conditions. A pack may take down a caribou or moose every few days during the winter, then fast until the next kill. But hungry wolves will eat almost anything, and in summer they rely on smaller prey to get by. They supplement their diet with squirrels, snowshoe hares, beavers, birds, and fish, particularly spawned-out salmon. When snowshoe hare populations cycle to high levels, wolves feast. Biologists at Denali National Park once observed 13 wolves chasing a single hare, which somehow escaped. The researchers later found the pack had killed at least 4 hares in that same covert. In some years, the survival of a breeding pair's pups may be linked to hare abundance. Wolves reach sexual maturity at age 2, but they rarely breed until they are 3 or 4. Few wolves live beyond 10. Wolves found in Yukon-Charley are larger and healthier than wolves in more southern regions. Mature males range in size from 85 to 115 pounds. Females are slightly smaller, from 75 to 90 pounds, and seldom more than 110 pounds. Exaggerated stories of enormous wolves float through Alaskan lore. Renowned hunter, trapper, and teller of tales Frank Glazer said that in 1939 he caught a 175-pound male on the 70 Mile River, reportedly the largest ever recovered. In 2001, wildlife biologist John Birch of the National Park Service caught a 148-pound wolf just outside the preserve. An accompanying female wolf weighed 110. "They were on a moose kill," Birch recalled. "He had a stomach full of meat, and so did she. I would classify any wolf over 140 as huge and extremely rare." There are an estimated 60,000 to 70,000 wolves in North America, with between 7,700 and 11,200 in Alaska. They range throughout mainland Alaska and many of the islands, with the fewest in the western and northern Alaska coastal zones. The Alexander Archipelago wolf, Canis lupus ligoni, found in southeast Alaska, tends to be darker and somewhat smaller than those in central Alaska. Coastal wolves eat Sitka deer, but derive much of their diet from the ocean. Some scientists recognize two separate Alaska subspecies, Canis lupus and Canis lupus ligoni, based on genetic studies, but others tend to lump the two together as Canis lupus. Wolves were called out as a key indicator species in the legislation that established Yukon-Charley. A healthy population of wolves requires a robust, functioning ecosystem, and a faltering apex predator community signals broader concerns. An initial survey conducted in 1985 estimated that 49 wolves, divided among 9 packs, lived within the boundaries of Yukon-Charley, with a half-dozen more from adjacent packs occupying or using areas peripheral to the preserve. 2 years later, another survey identified 13 packs totaling 70 wolves, although none lived exclusively within the preserve's boundaries. Residents of the region have long believed wolves to be abundant, even overpopulated, in the Tanana Hills, with a detrimental effect on moose and caribou. They believe the area could support many more moose than the official state estimate of 800. In their view, wolves also limit the caribou population. Such opinions are often unfounded, however. Until recently, there were no in-depth studies measuring the quantity and quality of the moose browse or caribou forage. In the far north, the quality and availability of winter range, more than any other factor, limits the abundance of these animals. But wolves continue to take the blame when moose and caribou populations decline. Because the preserve protects the vital calving grounds of a caribou herd highly prized by human hunters and is a popular moose hunting zone, some wildlife researchers view it as a laboratory where they can explore fundamental questions about predator-prey dynamics. Few places in the North support such an abundance and variety of prey species and their predators. Biologist Bruce Dale, supported by his supervisor Lane Adams, began a research project in 1993 to study the wolves of the preserve. His previous research in Gates of the Arctic National Park showed that prey numbers within wolf territories dropped quite low, but not low enough to show a decrease in kill rate. And the 1993 study shed further light on this key issue. The new study would reveal answers to many questions, such as how many wolves lived there, in how many packs, how big were their territories, what diseases, if any, were present in the population, what did they eat, what was their impact on caribou calving, on moose, on sheep. The study would not only yield information about prey relationships and population dynamics, but also highlight the contentious issues arising from the implementation of differing state and federal wildlife management policies. 1. Wolf 258. In early November 2010, 2 wolves coursed the open slopes above Copper Creek, a tributary of the Upper Charley River. Snow from a recent squall persisted in the lee of granite tors, and ice rimmed the shadowed rivulets. Scattered caribou grazed on a nearby ridge, while a nervous band of Dall sheep climbed sheer cliffs. The wolves, alert, were hunting. The day was sunny and unseasonably warm at 45 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind light, ideal conditions for flying. When the wolves heard the helicopter approaching fast and low, they broke into a run. As it grew louder and closer, the wolves parted ways. One, a black female known to biologists as Wolf 227 wore a radio collar. The helicopter was locked onto her signal, betraying her and her companion. Biologist John Birch signaled to the pilot that he wanted to dart Wolf 227's companion. As the helicopter closed in, the companion wolf veered wildly to shake the pursuit. But the pilot was an expert at chasing wolves. On this tundra hillside, escape was improbable. Sitting in the open door, and blasted by rotor wash, Birch fired his tranquilizer gun and struck the wolf's flank with 500 milligrams of tilazol, a safe, fast-acting veterinary anesthetic that has an analgesic effect. The small helicopter flared and banked away. Within a few minutes, the wolf went down. Birch, tall and soft-spoken, had been tracking Yukon-Charley wolves since 1996, when he took over the field work from biologist Nick Demma. A Minnesotan, Birch earned a bachelor's degree in wildlife biology from the University of Minnesota and a master's degree in wildlife biology from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. While still an undergraduate, he began working with L. David Meach in Minnesota on a variety of wolf research projects. Before coming to Alaska in 1985 to conduct wolf research in Denali National Park and Preserve for Meach, Birch worked tracking and trapping wolves for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, primarily in Minnesota and Wisconsin. Birch had more than 2 decades' experience working with wolves when he joined the Yukon-Charley project. When it came to catching and handling wolves, he had few peers. Over his career, he darted and collared between 400 and 500 wolves. Colleagues regarded Birch highly. "John is one of the most competent field biologists I have ever worked with," said Adams. "At Yukon-Charley, John became recognized as the guy you wanted along if you were working in remote locations. He's one of those adept field folks who can adapt to whatever he is facing, fix anything, work for long stretches under trying environmental conditions, and keep a good attitude throughout it all." After the helicopter landed, Birch hurried to the sedated wolf. A quick appraisal showed this young wolf was tolerating the drug. Birch had about an hour before it would begin to revive. The sedated wolf weighed 103 pounds and was about 2 years old. He was well furred and appeared to be in excellent health, with perfect teeth. Based on their location and previous sightings, he guessed that the young male, now designated Wolf 258, was a disperser from the 70-Mile River pack. Wolf researchers typically apply sequential numbers to their collared subjects, such as Wolf 227 and Wolf 258. Naming conventions for other wolf projects vary slightly. In Voyageurs National Park, for example, each collared animal is identified with VO, such as Wolf VO77, for Voyageurs. In Denali National Park, wolves get a 4-digit code with letters for their color and sex, Wolf 1804 GM, GM for gray male, or Wolf 1841 GF, GF for gray female. The first 2 digits represent the year the wolf was collared, and the last 2 indicate where it falls in the order of wolves collared that year. Common names, such as Blackie or George, are anathema to biologists who avoid anything anthropomorphic. After fitting the male wolf with a GPS collar, Birch, assisted by the pilot, collected vital signs: temperature, pulse, respiration rate, and blood oxygen level. They then took cheek swabs and hair samples and drew some blood, both to check for disease and to perform genetic analysis. Analysis later confirmed that the 2 wolves were unrelated. They weighed the wolf and examined his teeth for clues as to its age and condition. Birch finished just as the wolf began to revive. The wolf would be left to recover quietly on his own, although these days biologists stay with a sedated wolf until it has fully recovered. The young gray and white male was traveling with a collared female Birch knew well. He had first captured Wolf 227, then the breeding female of the Edwards Creek pack 3 years earlier. For the past 2 years, she'd been traveling alone, as the last surviving member of her pack, seldom venturing out of her core range on Washington Creek. This capture site on the upper Charley River was out of her normal territory. She had ventured into the range of the 70-mile River pack, whose territory extended east from the upper Charley River into the 70-mile river drainage. Early in the summer, Birch had spotted her traveling with another wolf and thought she'd paired up. The young male wolf he'd just collared confirmed his suspicions, and he was keen to find out if the sedated male was just a running partner or a mate to Wolf 227. Although 2 wolves are often called a pack, the key determinant is whether they produce pups. Dominant wolves breed, fight, and are able to pull down a caribou alone. Researchers typically capture and radio collar 1 to 3 individuals, primarily the breeders, in each wolf pack in a study area. Other pack members hunt and defend territory, but they don't breed or make decisions for the group. Because the breeding pair is least likely to leave a pack, researchers routinely capture and collar them. Birch caught Wolf 227 later that afternoon and replaced her old failing collar. Despite running solo for 2 years, the 6-year-old female had killed enough prey to stay in superb condition. She'd also managed to hold onto her core territory, or at least avoid lethal contact with trespassing packs. The collars would reveal mating and denning behavior. How the new pairing would affect territorial dynamics was but one of many questions Birch hoped the tracking collars would answer. At the time, biologists used 2 types of radio collars to track wolves. A conventional radio collar, in use for decades, transmits a pulsing signal that can be tracked from an aircraft equipped with a receiver and antennae. A GPS collar, on the other hand, transmits coordinates through a satellite to a computer, allowing biologists to more accurately monitor a wolf's travels, life, and death. Like a radio collar, a satellite collar can be tracked from aircraft, but the big difference is that location data is collected automatically. A GPS collar reveals a wolf's day-to-day movements across territory in search of food. Thus, a wolf remaining close to a particular site for a day or 2 may indicate it has killed a prey animal and is feeding. Biologists began putting GPS collars on wolves in the Yukon-Charley National Preserve in 2003. Birch was confident that the 2 new collars would transmit valuable information about the fate of the Edwards Creek pack, one of a dozen he monitored then. Before flying off, Birch paused for a few moments of silent contemplation. He never seemed to lose his appreciation for wolves and the surrounding wilderness. Wolves typically howl to find one another. A couple of days later, wolves 227 and 258 reunited about 15 miles downstream on the east bank of the Charley River. Over the next few days, they wandered into the 70-mile river drainage on the far eastern side of the preserve, perhaps a hint at Wolf 258's origin. Then they visited the bank of the ice-rimmed Yukon River 40 miles east as the raven flies from the capture site, where the weather turned cold and snowy. Over the next 2 weeks, the pair hunted Wolf 227's core territory between Washington Creek and...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?